Hello, welcome to Nobel Minds. I'm Zeinab Badawi here in Stockholm, home of the Nobel Prize. And this year we're joined by 5 of our laureates, and they're going to be sharing with us some big thoughts on some of the big topics of the day, like climate change, finding new treatments for COVID-19, and migration and its impact on jobs. Well, here in the studio, I'm joined by a terrific audience in Stockholm who are going to be putting their questions to our laureates. And our laureates join us via video link from all over the world. They can't be with us here in person because of COVID-19 travel restrictions. Now, gentlemen, I want to say welcome to you all. Congratulations on winning the Nobel Prize this year. And of course, congratulations to all the recipients. Studio audience, please join me in giving them a massive round of applause. We salute your great knowledge, and we're in awe of all of you. And, you know, the discussions today are going to be punctuated by short videos which will be highlighting the subject matter in each category, why it was awarded and who the recipients were. But first, let's just introduce the laureates to you and kick off with some general questions. And Benjamin List, you are one of the Nobel Prize winners in chemistry, and you join us from Germany. And, you know, gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic and all the focus on the vaccines has really made the world perhaps think about the role of science in our society so much more. How far do you think that COVID-19 has elevated the role of the scientist in society? Do you feel more loved, Benjamin?
That's a good question for the chemists, because traditionally we are sort of viewed as the people who pollute the environment and throw plastic waste into the oceans. But in reality, of course, also chemists have feverishly worked on developing small molecule drugs against COVID-19. And I think now it's up to the regulatory agencies to approve them, and I hope that will change the view a little bit about chemistry in the future. Let's see.
Okay. All right, Abdulrazak Gurnah, congratulations to you. You are the Nobel Prize laureate in literature, so obviously not a scientist, and you join us from Kent in England. What's your take on this? Has your faith in science and scientists been boosted?
Well, I've always had faith in scientists. Especially when it comes to coping with emergencies of this kind. So my faith has been, of course, heightened. It was such a speedy and such a wonderful thing to come up with these vaccines so quickly. But no, for me, scientists are okay, are good people.
David Card, one of the economics laureates, you're in the United States. You're not a scientist again, but do you agree with Abdulrazak? Scientists are good people?
Yeah, I think mostly. You know, I'm sure there's a range. I think it's very impressive that I agree with what was said, that creating the vaccine so quickly. On the other hand, I think, especially in the United States, it's very obvious that there's a huge political divide, and I think COVID has really accentuated that and led to this sort of tribal attitudes toward vaccines or not vaccines. It's really dividing us even more than ever.
Right. Ardem Patapoutian, also in California in the United States, you are one of the laureates in medicine or physiology. So a bit of a mixed review there from David Card. What do you think?
I completely agree with David. I think if you look at the speed with which these vaccines and medicines for COVID were developed, even before that, just sequencing the virus, sharing the information, I think one of the biggest highlights for science ever, perhaps. And overlapping with this, unfortunately, as was just mentioned, is this still strong sentiment of not trusting science, anti-vax movement is really worrisome. And I hope that the Nobel Minds and all these events help, put forward the fact that science is really being used these days mainly for the benefit of humanity. And we hope to overcome this mistrust issues.
All right, and Klaus Hasselmann, congratulations to you. You're one of the trio who won the Physics Nobel Prize, and you join us from Hamburg in Germany. So we get some set of scientists saying one thing and then another set contradicting them. People don't know which scientists to believe. So surely there isn't a kind of uniform approach to science, is there? There's not sort of a correct answer as such.
Well, I think there were 98% scientists that they talk a lot of sense, and the 2% they talk a lot of nonsense. And unfortunately, the public likes to listen to the 2% occasionally to make life more interesting. But I think the scientists as a whole are pretty uniform in their analysis of the problem. So if people get used to listening to scientists as true scientists, they should have no problems.
All right, let's just take a pause here and see what our studio audience have to say about this. So, studio audience, the focus on vaccines has put the spotlight on science and scientists. Has it renewed your faith in science? Raise your hand if it has. You're doing very well here, Nobel Prize scientists, because I think that's an overwhelming majority. Put up your hand if it's undermined your faith in science and scientists. Not a single hand. My goodness. You've hardly started discussing with us and you've already won the studio audience over completely. So I'm sure you at home will have your own views on the impact of COVID-19 and the effect it's had on science and scientists. All right, let's start now with our first category, and we're going to show you this video highlighting why the prize was awarded and to whom in the category of chemistry. Many industries and fields of research depend on chemists' ability to build new and functional molecules. These could be anything from substances that capture light in solar cells or store energy in batteries, to molecules that can make lightweight running shoes or inhibit the progress of disease in the body. This year's Chemistry Prize is awarded to Benjamin List and David Macmillan for separately creating a completely new method for building molecules, organocatalysis, a new instrument in the chemist's toolbox. Synthetic catalysts that are faster, greener, and more easy to control than metal-based catalysts or enzymes. In chemical constructions where the catalyst cannot be steered in a particular direction, a situation often arises where two molecules are formed as mirror images of each other and where one has properties that are not wanted. This is especially true in the manufacture of drugs. For example, the development of treatment for viral diseases such as COVID-19. So, Benjamin List, as one of the chemistry laureates, how is your work helping us find new ways of treating COVID-19 by creating drugs rather than vaccines?
Well, I mean, what we are doing here is fundamental research. It's basic research, and it's not applied research. And the ultimate aim is not always to contribute to societal problems. However, I really have to say that many of the technologies that came out of asymmetric organocatalysis are currently already being used to make pharmaceuticals. This is very exciting for me to see, and small molecule drugs play an important role in treating viral diseases. Consider, for example, HIV. This probably has been one of the worst, if not the worst, pandemic of all times for humans. And you don't hear so much anymore because in most countries, this is now very much under control. And in this case, not because we have vaccines, but we have small molecule drugs. Patients take 3 or 4 different drugs and live basically a healthy life. And I'm very excited to say that the technology that we have developed or helped developing back in 2000 is currently being used to making one of those pharmaceuticals and actually saves lives. I always like to say it's something a sentence I recently developed. It's like one molecule away from magic, right? Before you had the magic stick and you can magically convert one material into another one. But now you take one molecule and it really does it. It's so beautiful. It's the turnover that makes catalysts so powerful.
That's really interesting. So I just want to get an idea from all of you. What attracted you in the first place to get involved in the subject matter that you are involved in? Benjamin, I know you had quite a colourful childhood with all sorts of things going on. Just remind us of that, please.
Well, in my case, it was really, I don't know why, but for some reason, when I was 11 years old, before I even had chemistry in school, I was under the impression that chemists knew everything, right? I thought chemists know what the world is made out and how the molecules behave, so they should understand human behavior and climate change, perhaps, like everything, basically. So that's what drew me to chemistry. And then I got a book. At the time, there was no internet, so you couldn't Google it. So I got a book from the library. And I learned how to make gunpowder and other fun things.
You had all sorts of explosions going on in your laboratory with your two brothers, didn't you?
Yes, that's true. Fortunately, we never managed to have an explosion, because in order to have an explosion, you need to conceal the gunpowder in a tight sort of package. And we never managed to get to that stage, but we had a beaker full of gunpowder. A match was enlightened and fell into the beaker. A big flame came out, lots of smoke was created. And then the pharmacist that was on top of this cellar where we had our laboratory would never sell any chemicals to us anymore from that day onward. So
I'm not surprised, Ben. I mean, can't blame him, can you? Ardem Patapoutian, what about you? What got you into? Because actually you didn't start off wanting to be a scientist working in a lab, did you? You were going to study to become a doctor.
Yes, so I'm Armenian and I grew up in Lebanon, and when I immigrated to the United States at the age of 18, I didn't really realize that science as a career was an option for me. So I was an undergraduate student in pre-med, and I literally worked in a laboratory just to get a letter of recommendation for medical school. But I absolutely fell in love with the discovery process, the research, just coming into lab and thinking of unanswered questions to ask.
So David Card, Benjamin List's great-great-grandfather was a chemist, and his aunt actually won a Nobel Prize in science. What have you got in your genes?
Well, I guess my family are farmers, so
Right.
a little more modest. I was actually a physics major in college for a while, and I was helping my girlfriend at the time. She had an economics textbook and she was kind of stuck on the formulas. And I started reading the book and realized that it actually had a lot of interesting things to say about agricultural markets. And growing up on a farm, I had known about those markets, but I didn't realize there was an analytical framework that actually had something to say about them. And so I got really interested in the book.
Interesting. Abdulrazak Gurnah, I mean, you grew up in Zanzibar, which is part of Tanzania. Did you have writers in your family? How did you fall into writing?
No, I didn't have writers in my family. Neither of my parents went to school. And none of my siblings were particularly interested in being writers. There wasn't such a thing, really, in a sense of a career. So, no, all this came to me after moving to England, really. And even then, it came slowly. It didn't come, like picking up a book and saying, hey, I can do that. It was much more gradual sort of realization that there was something to be said.
Ardem, do you want to come in on this?
I'm curious with Benjamin, is your lineage of Nobels in your family, how do you think that's affected you with respect to your interest in this, ambitions perhaps? Because we already have ridiculous questions being asked to my son if he's ever going to win the Nobel Prize, which I think is, again, so ridiculous. But I'm curious about your thoughts.
I never spoke about it so much because I felt that in the family, maybe now there's this expectation, once you're working in the natural sciences, you automatically have to win a Nobel Prize, right? So I felt a certain pressure, I have to admit. I hope your son doesn't feel that. And but on the other hand, also it kind of was encouraging in that I realized somehow in my family this is possible with the gene pool that we have. We can excel in science, and perhaps that helped me in a way. So that at least counterbalanced this pressure that was on my shoulders back then.
All right, now let's go to our next category, the Nobel Prize for Physics, and we have this short video highlighting what it was awarded for.
All complex systems consist of many different interacting parts. They may have an enormous number of components or be governed by chance and are therefore difficult to describe mathematically. This year's Nobel Prize in Physics is awarded for new methods to understand chaotic and seemingly random phenomena that help us to better understand the climate and predict global warming. Syukuro Manabe demonstrated how increased concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere led to higher temperatures at the surface of the Earth, and thereby laid the foundation for the development of today's climate models. Klaus Hasselmann answered the question of why climate models can be reliable despite changeable and chaotic weather patterns. He also showed how we can distinguish between how human activities and natural influences affect global warming. The other half of the prize goes to Giorgio Parisi for his revolutionary contributions to a wider understanding of how hidden patterns can be detected in disordered and random phenomena within climate and other complex systems.
So, Professor Klaus Hasselmann, as we saw in that video, you've established that the increased temperatures in atmosphere is due to emissions of carbon dioxide caused by humans. How difficult is it, do you think, to get people to actually change their behaviour as a result of that to bring down temperatures?
Well, I thought the fact that the CO2 that people were putting into the atmosphere would be changing the climate was pretty obvious, and I wasn't the only person who pointed that out. But the fact that people had to respond to this and somehow change their actions and their policies to prevent this was something quite new to the public. The difficulty is that people are not willing to look in a long perspective, and they react on a very short time scale, and don't realise that we have this problem now for 50 or 60 years, and we could have tackled it long ago, and that we have the techniques nowadays to switch to renewables without really affecting the economy greatly. How we solve that problem, scientists, to get this across to the public that we have to do something now that is important for 50 or 60 years in the future, is something we haven't really found the right solution so far.
David Card, I mean, why do you think it is so difficult to get people to change their lifestyles so that the planet benefits from it, actually use their car less, don't use so much air conditioning and all the rest of it?
Well, people become very comfortable with, very high consuming lifestyle. A good example recently, oil prices have gone up quite a bit in North America, and which of course would be necessary if we were going to try and ration the amount of petrochemicals that are used. And in response to that, the president had to release the National Petroleum Reserve. So people are really unwilling to make large sacrifices. They don't seem to be as convinced as I am that such sacrifices are necessary.
And do you practice what you preach, Klaus?
Yes, we go by bike and walk a lot, and don't go by plane. And we live a very economic life, which I think is very. I should ask my wife here; she knows better than I do. But I think we have a very sensible way of life that is in accordance with our principle that we should try to preserve the climate.
Abdulrazak Gurnah, what about you? I mean, do you lead a fairly green lifestyle? I am, after all, talking to you from Sweden, and this young lady, Greta Thunberg, of course, has achieved worldwide fame for her advocacy on climate change.
Yes, well, within whatever is possible. It's not always possible for individuals to say, I will live like this and not do that, because you share so much. There are many places where there is no choice. There are many peoples and societies who really do not have a choice other than, say, for example, to burn wood, because there is no other way of cooking. There is no other way of doing simple things in life. But the greatest contributors, the greatest makers, as it were, of this problem are not them, and are actually people who are, as was mentioned earlier by David, are people who do not seem to be able to resist living in comfortable ways, despite the fact that they're destroying the environment they live in.
David Carr?
So could I just say one thing? Yeah, in response to Professor Gurnah's point, I think the same thing is true here with respect to climate change. Many of the immediate victims of the situation we have now would be in low-lying places like parts of Bangladesh or some of the Pacific Islands. And these are often very poor places that are already affected. And they have, just barely surviving in many cases, and have not really contributed to the problem, but are the first victims. The people who are arguably the cause of most of the trouble are, in many cases, completely insulated from it.
All right. So we've heard how climate change can have an impact on people such as those in Africa who have least contributed to it. And we have the phenomenon of climate refugees and so on. So now let's look at the wider theme of migration and exile with this year's literature laureate, and that's Abdulrazak Gurnah, who writes a great deal about this theme.
Abdulrazak Gurnah, who was born in Zanzibar and moved to England as a young man in the 1960s, has written 10 novels as well as numerous short stories and essays. Several of his works deal with the theme of immigration and exile, which he's described as the phenomenon of our times. His novels, including Paradise, The Last Gift, and By the Sea, outline the many ways that human beings can find themselves in exile from their homes, families, and communities, and from themselves, and he sensitively examines what it is that keeps those loving spaces at least partly intact. During his career as a writer, Gurnah has studied and taught English and post-colonial literature at Kent University, and has helped define a new narrative in how we view post-imperial history.
So, Abdulrazak Gurnah, I mean, just briefly outline for us your own story. How difficult was it for you to cross continents at the age of 18 from Zanzibar to England?
It was, I think, the first flight I actually took, that flight. For somebody who's 18, filled with recklessness and ignorance and, as it turned out, poverty, there was trouble ahead. And this is often what I think when I see these young people taking such risks with their lives, crossing the Mediterranean in little dinghies and crossing the English Channel in inflatables. But they're not, of course, all of them young, and they're not, of course, all of them people like I was, who was just looking for a better life, rather than what is the case often is people are trying to escape war and violence of various kinds. The process is dangerous, is fraught with problems. You are focused on getting to wherever it is that you're getting. But when you get there, you then, I think, also become aware of others who are still there, coping with the very things that you thought you were so brave and resolute to escape. And I think that too creates a certain problem.
That's really interesting, because that is very much the theme of your latest book, Afterlives, which I absolutely loved. You look at both sides of the story, the person who migrated and also what he left behind. And in your case, personally, it was quite difficult because you went for many years, didn't you, without seeing your parents and your sisters whom you'd left behind?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, mine was a slightly, well, to some extent, unusual case in the sense that I could not go back, that is legally, could not go back. But I think it's also often the case for people who migrate that you've invested hugely in this move. So it's a life investment. You go there, wherever it is that you're going. There's a long struggle usually for most people to make good. By the time you've made good, and you can't go back without making good, because otherwise you think, well, so what did you do all that for? You know, why have you put everybody through all this stuff for? So you have to wait till you've made good before you go back and say, I've made good. By which time your whole life is transformed. You're a different person.
Interesting. Ardem Patapoutian, you're of Armenian origin, but you were born in Beirut, Lebanon, and you left and went to the United States when you were 18 years of age. So you yourself have also had the personal experience of being the migrant. Your parents didn't follow you until afterwards. Does what Abdulrazak's been saying there, has it resonated with you in any way, and if so, how?
Absolutely. I think one could have looked at me as a 18-year-old kid from Lebanon, and certainly there was nothing Nobel-worthy about that boy. And it's just been being an immigrant is difficult to explain, but it's part of you. It's part of your identity. And there's a need to belong, and you work very hard on this. And it's interesting, I was looking at some numbers, and I think of all the American Nobel laureates in the last 20 years from the United States, in sciences at least, I think something like 40% are immigrants. That's an astonishing number.
All right, so we've been talking about migration and what it's like to leave your home and so on, but one particular aspect of migration which concerns a lot of people is, what does it do to employment? And that takes us to our next prize category, that of the Nobel Prize in Economics. Let's watch this short video.
Many of the big questions in the social sciences deal with cause and effect. These are often difficult to answer due to a lack of comparisons. However, this year's laureates have shown that by using natural experiments, it is possible to answer such questions. David Card has used random events to study key issues in the labour market economy and has been able to overturn generally accepted truths. Card found that, unlike in classical models, raising the minimum wage does not increase unemployment and even has the potential to reduce it. Another study found that a rise in immigration does not necessarily cost native workers their jobs nor lower their wages. The second half of this year's Economics Prize goes to Joshua Angrist and Guido Imbens, who, through similar natural experiments, have shown that investment in education, such as more teachers, affects how well students later succeed in the labour market. This effect is particularly strong for students from disadvantaged backgrounds.
So, David Card, you carried out your research a few years ago. How relevant is it still today in terms of your findings?
I would say the work I did on migration is more topical than ever. We were talking earlier about the bad reception that a lot of times is received by migrants to a new country. My research is basically shown quite substantially that the kind of concerns about economic impacts of migrants that people often raise are pretty small, I would argue negligible, and that in fact the real issue is this more of a almost clannish view that a lot of people have, that they want to protect their culture, language, religion, and that is causing a very strong negative reaction to migration in many countries. My work kind of said the economic side of migration is probably a big benefit, exactly as Ardem's saying about like so many Nobel Prize winners have been immigrants. Actually, a very large number of those who aren't immigrants are children of immigrants. So the benefits of on the science and at the high end of the labor market have been well documented. But my own interest is almost always on the lower end of the labor market. The upper end of the labor market kind of takes care of itself.
Right. Okay,
we don't have to worry.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry so much about them.
Okay, so perhaps not lower educated jobs, but just looking at low income jobs. Ardem Patapoutian, when you went to the United States, you had a couple of jobs to see your way through, because you said you arrived without very much money when you were 18. What kind of jobs did you do?
Oh my goodness, I did quite a bit in 1 year. I was a pizza delivery guy. I worked in a sandwich shop. I worked in an Armenian newspaper. I was doing some editor work, but people love to hear this. I also wrote the horoscopes, made them up. And so some of them fun, some of them tedious, but I think this kind of work is great because it reminds you not to take things for granted.
All right, let me just break for a moment and go to our studio audience, because we've got a question from Julia Floodman.
Yes, for David. Have you considered whether the corona pandemic could be applied as a natural experiment and research area?
I think there's going to be some kinds of research along those lines. The problem is that, as all the scientists here know, when you do an experiment, you have to have a control group. And unfortunately, COVID is one of those things that there's almost no one that wasn't affected. So it's going to be somewhat difficult to do straightforward analyses. There will, you can never count out. Someone will come up with a clever way to do a comparison that might be quite useful. And certainly COVID is providing a lot of helpful data for thinking about, for instance, there's a lot of new data being generated with all the new technology that's available on transmission of diseases. And so we're going to have much better epidemiological models going forward. And the next time we have a pandemic, we'll be much better equipped, I think, to try and understand the way populations interact in complicated ways that make the spread of the disease a little bit more complicated than it is in the simplest stories that people tell.
So, thank you, David. Let's go for another question from our studio audience. Zarina Kultovic, you've got a question.
Yes, it would be interesting to hear what the prize winners think about the lack of diversity, especially at higher academic levels. And what practices do you implement in your work, or what should be implemented to make sure that we, for example, have more female laureates in the coming years?
Ben, do you want to come in on this at all, Benjamin, on diversity in science?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I mean, we in our institute, for example, we have five boys, 5 directors here, and this is a problem, of course, and we are very well aware of that. Our scientific advisory board never forgets to remind us of this. But I think the problem is, we should really be aware, why do we want diversity, right? And I would argue it's not so much because of a justice issue, but it's because we want to tap into all these different pools of humanity, if you wish, like women and people of color and whatnot. They should all be part of science to make science more successful and better, actually. That's the ultimate aim. And for me, it's we not only work on the top level, like trying to give more women awards and so on, but also I, for example, love to go to kindergarten and to elementary school and talk about science with the kids there and involve the girls as much as the boys. I think we should really start on a very early level, encouraging the girls also to have that as a life choice, a normal career choice for them, like working in chemistry or physics or math.
Right, so let's now move to our last category, and also a category that has great relevance in terms of its application for some of society's great problems, and that's the Nobel Prize in medicine or physiology.
Our ability to sense heat, cold and touch is essential for survival and our interaction with the world around us. In our daily lives, we take these sensations for granted. But how are impulses that allow us to experience the heat of the sun initiated? How can a kiss be transformed into an electrical signal that transmits the sense of it to our spine and brain? This year's prize in physiology or medicine is awarded for discoveries about receptors in the nerve endings of the skin that switch on and off as a response to temperature and pressure. The function of the receptors is absolutely necessary for us to be able to orient ourselves and our body parts. Intensive ongoing research originating from the independent work of Ardem Patapoutian and David Julius focuses on elucidating the receptors' functions in a variety of physiological processes.
So the Nobel Prize there for medicine or physiology, and Ardem Patapoutian, you are one of the laureates. So just explain to us briefly, why is pain and pain research and treatment so complex?
First, I should say that I realize now that I'm the Nobel laureate for a kiss, which is excellent.
You'll explain that in a moment, but just answer that pain one for me. Yes, we all want to know what's in a kiss. Yes.
So pain is, an emotion, and we absolutely rely on pain to avoid danger. But chronic pain is when the stimulus that initially caused pain is not there, but we still feel it. So it's kind of an inappropriate pain. And it's one of the major unmet medical needs. We know from the opioid endemic, there's not actually great drugs to treat many of symptoms of pain, which could be associated with any disease. Neuropathic pain is just one example. So it's a field of science that we're just starting to understand the molecular biology behind it. But it's, again, a major unanswered question in the clinic.
Right. And what other conditions might your research, and of course that of your co-recipient, David Julius, what kind of conditions may we see benefiting from it?
People who suffer from neuropathic pain, for example, have one of the things that they experience is called tactile allodynia, which simply means that touch becomes painful. So you actually experience this after injury or sunburn, but it goes away in a few days, so it's not a big deal. But people who suffer from neuropathic pain, just wearing a shirt can be painful. And this is an excruciating situation. And again, there's no drugs for it. So we have shown that these molecules that we have found, which are the touch sensors, these ion channels called piezos, that if you block them, this form of pain would be alleviated. So future medicines in specifically blocking these channels have an opportunity to help patients who suffer from this.
Right. So I know it wasn't your exact area of research, effective touch and what makes a touch soothing or not, or what makes a kiss pleasant or not. But I think during lockdown, a lot of people, especially those who live alone, really felt deprived of physical contact, didn't they? I mean, so why are you known now as the professor of the kiss?
I think touch is absolutely amazing. I think the ability to discriminate such small indentations, usually 1 in 500th diameter of a hair indentation, you can detect with your skin in your fingers. But as you said, there's a whole other side of touch, which is what we call affective touch. So that's the pleasantness of a hug or a kiss or a pat on the shoulder. So it's an organ both to help us discriminate and get information from the world, but at the same time, it's absolutely required for our emotional health.
And I think a lot of people say that actually a hug is safer than a handshake in COVID.
That's right.
Isn't that right? Yeah.
That's right. Because during a handshake, you will, if the person was infected and touching their nose, and then through your hands, you touch your eyes and nose, those are the ways you can get infected. If you hug properly without exchanging too much breath, then you're quite safe. So people should hug more. That's my advice.
You've quite put me off shaking hands with anybody in the future, Ardem, I have to say. Abdulrazak and Benjamin, do you want to come in on this at all about management of pain or the need for human beings? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Ben.
I can contribute to the hugging thing because I wasn't aware of Ardem's awesome research. It's really, really, really impressive what you've done. But that hugging is super important, I knew before. And in fact, after I got the call from Stockholm, I hugged everybody from my department. That took a while. And they did a high-speed video and tweeted it. So it was a really beautiful moment.
Abdulrazak, have you gone around hugging people? Yeah, go on.
No, I don't do a lot of hugging, especially not these recent times.
Yeah.
But I'm very, very relieved to hear that there is so much being done to relieve us from pain. My back's hurting, so I'm glad somebody's on the job.
All right, great, good. Watch this space, I think that's what it is. Let's go to a couple of studio questions now. Alex Bersellini Farinotti. 3 names there. You've got a question. Go ahead.
Yes. So we know that science is not always huge successes, and also failures form our career and make us improve. So my question is, what was your biggest scientific failure, and how did that influence your professional development?
Ben, I'm going to come to you because I think your experiment pretty much worked first time, didn't it?
Yeah, that's true. In my case, the very first experiment I did independently, I mean, literally the very first experiment was what is now being recognized with this award. And I was just thinking about the failures I did in the past. What I mostly did wrong was I'm sometimes too ambitious, but I think we should not take those failures as discouraging, and we should always aim high. I think it's really, really important that we aim high and don't just do what is expected to work.
And remember, he failed at the age of 11 with his experiment, just a flame, no explosion. David?
I've tried many research designs that turned out to be completely uninformative. So I've had many failures, yeah.
There you go. You're inspired now, Alex. Don't be put off if there are any failures along the way. OK, let's go to a final question now. Anja Ramstrom. What would you like to ask, Anja?
Yes, so I know research can usually become quite time-consuming. So I was wondering if you've been able to keep a good work-to-life balance in the meantime.
Good work-life balance. David?
Well, I think my wife would have something to say about this. We once calculated, I'm always late. I'm always working on something, and I just think I put another half hour in, I maybe get somewhere. And she once calculated I owed her about 10 years of waiting for me. So
that's a waste of her time then, a lot of time. Klaus, what about you?
Work for me was just, it was fun. And I never regarded this as work. And I got complaints from my wife that I was working too much, but I thought it was just fun. And I never really saw much difference between work and play.
Right, OK, good. And now you've won this prize, you've got this platform. What are you going to do with it? You're going to become an advocate for climate change, another David Attenborough perhaps, who's got a few years on you?
Oh, gee, I have to think about this. First of all, I have to realise that it's true. I don't quite understand that I got this prize, but somehow I got the prize for doing things that I just like to do. I haven't really thought very much about it. I have to realise that I have this prize. I'll wake up tomorrow morning and say it's just a dream.
OK, and Benjamin Liss, I mean, has this been the event in your life that's really changed the way you look at life? You've had other life-changing experiences, haven't you?
Yeah, you probably talk about the events in 2004 when my family and I were on a vacation in Thailand and this big tsunami struck. I don't often want to talk about it, but in this case, I thought it taught me an important lesson. And that was like we were in a hotel close to the beach, and then this big wave came. My little boys, 3 and 5 years old, non-swimmers. My mom, my wife, and I took one of those boys, and then the wave hit us, and we ended up in the dark ocean, lost the kids. And then, over the day, we found each other again. And that was the greatest miracle, because in the hotel where we were, actually 75% of the people died, including 2 very good friends of us. And then we were 3. So I found my wife and my older son. He was injured. But the young one, the 3-year-old, was lost. And the day went on, and we had to take care of the older son because he was severely injured. So we finally arrived 10 hours later at a hospital 150 kilometers away. And then there was a room where there was full of children that were alone. And in the very end of this room, there was one boy that looked like my son. And I thought, okay, this is probably some kind of illusion that I have, just having lost my son. But then I got closer and closer. And when his face was right in front of me, I realized it's him, it's Theo. And this moment was really, really the most beautiful moment in my life, I guess. And the amazing thing is we lost everything, of course, all our clothes and passports and whatever. But the subsequent weeks were probably the happiest weeks in my life, having survived this and being freed of any tension from my normal work life, right? For example, I couldn't care less if somebody cites our work, right? My colleagues and I probably all know how that feels if somebody ignores our important contributions. We're really upset normally, but I couldn't care less. I also couldn't care less about the recognition I get for my work, and awards and prizes was simply unimportant. And I can assure you, in that moment, you really realize what is important in life, and it's not receiving a Nobel Prize, even though, of course, now I'm super happy about it.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Everybody knows this, but it's also great to hear this maybe from a Nobel Prize winner, that, receiving prizes and recognition and actually, finding what you were always dreaming of in your life before doesn't make you happy, at least not in a long-lasting way. It's just a truth. There are other things that make us happy, and that's a healthy family and just to live and enjoy life as it is.
Thank you for that very moving account there, Benjamin, and really putting that story into perspective for us from that very tragic time in 2004. Sobering thought to end our discussions, but I thank all of you for sharing your insights and your knowledge with us. It's been an absolute privilege listening to all of you, and renewed congratulations to you and all of your co-laureates, and I wish you all the best in your future ventures. And thank you very much indeed to my studio audience, especially those of you who asked questions. And of course to you, wherever you're watching this programme, from me, Zeinab, Badawi, and the rest of the Nobel Minds team here in Stockholm, goodbye and season's greetings.